I'm Samantha Mitchell, 32 years old, and I never expected to see my parents again after they abandoned me at age 4. Yet here I stood, staring at legal papers demanding $2.7 million money my grandfather Walter left me in his will. The same parents who hadn't bothered to call in 28 years now wanted the inheritance from the man who actually raised me. My hands trembled with rage as I made a silent promise to Grandpa Walter. They won't take what you worked so hard to build. I won't let them. Before I dive into this wild story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up against family who only showed up when money was involved. Trust me, what happened next in this battle will leave you speechless. My earliest memories of my parents, Rachel and David Mitchell, are fragments that don't form a complete picture. I remember my mother's perfume always too strong and my father's booming laugh when he was trying to impress someone. What stands out most clearly is their love of appearances. Our house was filled with things we couldn't afford: designer furniture, expensive art, and a luxury car parked outside that was perpetually at risk of repossession. I was 4 years old when I first met my grandfather Walter Harrison, my mother's father, at a family gathering. Even at that young age, I could sense the tension between him and my parents. Walter had built a successful manufacturing business from nothing. He'd grown up poor, worked since age 12, and valued every dollar he earned. He watched my parents spend recklessly with obvious disapproval. "You can't keep living beyond your means, Rachel," I overheard him telling my mother one night. "What example are you setting for Samantha?" My mother had laughed it off. "Dad, you worry too much. David has some big deals coming through soon." Walter had sighed, a sound I would come to recognize as his response to my mother's financial fantasies. "That's what you said last time I paid off your credit cards." Their arguments about money became more frequent, especially after Walter refused to fund my father's latest business venture, something about luxury vacation properties that even I, as a child, could tell made Walter uncomfortable. The tension at family dinners became unbearable, with my father drinking too much and my mother crying in the bathroom afterward. Then came that Saturday morning in April. I remember it was sunny because light streamed through the car windows as my parents drove me to Grandpa Walter's countryside estate in Massachusetts. They had packed a small bag for me. "It's just for the weekend, Sammy," my mother said, not meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Grandpa Walter wants special time with his favorite girl." I was excited. Grandpa Walter always had cookies and let me feed the birds on his property. He had a big library with children's books he would read to me for hours. When we arrived, my father didn't turn off the engine. My mother hurried me to the door with my little pink backpack. Walter opened the door, surprised to see us unannounced. "Rachel?" I wasn't expecting. "Dad, can you take Samantha for the weekend? David and I need some time to sort things out." She kissed my forehead quickly. "Be good for Grandpa, Sammy." She was back in the car before I could process what was happening. Walter's hand tightened on my shoulder as we watched them drive away. It wasn't until dinner time that Walter found the envelope tucked into my backpack. Inside were signed temporary custody papers and a handwritten note. "We can't do this anymore. It's too much. Samantha deserves better than what we can give her. Please don't try to find us." I didn't understand what was happening when Walter made phone calls late into the night, his voice alternating between anger and pleading. I didn't understand when he sat me down the next day with tears in his eyes. "Samantha, sweetheart," he said carefully, "your mom and dad need to be away for a while, a long while. But I'm here, and I'll always take care of you." Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. No calls came. No letters. No birthday cards. Walter filed for permanent guardianship, a process made easier by my parents' signed documents and continued absence. The child psychologist Walter took me to explain that sometimes adults make choices that have nothing to do with the children who love them, that it wasn't my fault. But what 4-year-old understands abandonment? I would sit by the window some days, watching the driveway, certain they would return. Walter would find me there and gently guide me to the kitchen for hot chocolate, never making false promises that they would come back, but assuring me I was loved and wanted by him. The first betrayal had been established, the foundation laid for what would come decades later. My parents had chosen freedom over parenthood, financial irresponsibility over family responsibility, and Walter, at 63 years old, had chosen to become a father figure again when he should have been enjoying his retirement. Grandpa Walter's estate became my sanctuary. The sprawling 1,920 seconds colonial house sat on 15 acres of woodland and gardens about an hour outside of Boston. It was nothing like the sleek, modern house my parents had struggled to keep up with payments on. Walter's home was comfortable, lived in, filled with books and mementos from his travels and business career. Money doesn't buy class, Walter would say, and it certainly doesn't buy happiness. But hard work? That builds character. Walter Harrison had grown up during the Depression era, the son of a factory worker who lost his job when the economy collapsed. Walter started working odd jobs at 12, saved enough to put himself through college, and built Harrison Manufacturing from a small workshop into a company with hundreds of employees. He sold the business when he turned 60 but kept his seat on the board of directors. My early years with Walter were filled with both love and difficulty. Nightmares plagued me, dreams where I was lost, where I called out for parents who couldn't hear me. Walter found me a child therapist, Dr. Linden, who specialized in childhood trauma. Twice a week, Walter would drive me to her office, wait patiently in the lobby, and afterward take me for ice cream, regardless of the weather. Feelings are like ice cream, Walter would tell me. They melt if you don't deal with them right away. Better to talk about the hard stuff while it's still fresh. School was another challenge. Mother's Day projects left me in tears. Family tree assignments were modified by understanding teachers. Walter came to every school event, sat in tiny chairs during parent-teacher conferences, and cheered loudest at my soccer games despite knowing nothing about the sport. As I grew older, Walter taught me valuable lessons about money and responsibility. At 8, I started receiving an allowance that was divided into 3 jars: spend, save, and give. Walter matched whatever went into the save jar, teaching me the value of delayed gratification. The give portion went to causes we researched together, instilling philanthropy as a core value. Walter's home office became a place of learning. He would explain his investments to me in simple terms, then gradually in more detail as I grew older. By 12, I understood the basics of the stock market. By 15, I was helping him analyze potential investments. Money is just a tool, Samantha, he would say. Like any tool, it can build or destroy depending on who's wielding it and why. When I was 12, an envelope arrived addressed to Walter. He opened it at the breakfast table, his expression darkening as he read. "What's wrong, Grandpa?" I asked. He hesitated, then slid the letter across the table. "Your mother wrote to me." My heart raced as I reached for it. 8 years of silence broken. But the letter contained no questions about me, no request to reestablish contact with their daughter. Instead, Rachel wrote about financial hardships, medical bills, and ended with a direct request for $50,000 to get back on their feet. Are they coming to see me?" I asked, my voice small. Walter covered my hand with his. "They didn't ask about that, sweetheart. And I don't think their interest is genuine. Are you going to send them money?" Walter shook his head. Enabling bad behavior never helps anyone. I learned that too late with your mother. That night, Walter told me stories about my mother's youth, her pattern of financial irresponsibility, the way she would use emotional manipulation to get what she wanted, how she'd been drawn to your father because of his grand promises and charismatic personality despite Walter's concerns. "I failed your mother by making things too easy," Walter confessed. "I won't make the same mistake with you. You'll know how to stand on your own feet and recognize people who only want you for what you can give them." More letters came over the years, always to Walter. Never to me directly. Always about money. Never about reconciliation. Walter kept them in a locked drawer in his office, documenting the pattern but shielding me from their emotional impact. Through Walter's guidance, I developed resilience and insight beyond my years. The abandoned child grew into a young woman who understood that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's defined by who chooses to stay when others walk away. I was in my junior year at Boston University, majoring in business administration with a minor in psychology, when I noticed the changes in Walter during my weekend visits home. His handwriting had become shaky. He moved more slowly. One morning, I found him struggling to button his shirt, frustration evident on his face. "Just these damn old fingers," he dismissed when I asked if something was wrong. But I insisted on driving him to his doctor, where he was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. The neurologist explained the progression would be gradual but unavoidable. Walter listened stoically, asking practical questions about medications and lifestyle adjustments. I sat beside him taking notes, my heart breaking while trying to maintain the composed facade I knew he needed from me. On the drive home, Walter was quiet until we pulled into the driveway of the estate. "I want you to focus on finishing your degree," he said firmly. "Don't worry about me." "Not happening," I replied with the same stubborn tone I'd inherited from him. "I'm transferring to a school closer to home and moving back." We argued the only serious argument we'd ever had. Walter didn't want to be a burden. I refused to be anywhere else when he needed me. Eventually, he conceded when I pointed out I could complete my degree online and still work at the local business consultancy where I'd interned. "You're as hard-headed as I am," Walter had said with grudging pride. The next 3 years became our most precious time together. As Walter's physical abilities declined, our conversations deepened. During our evening ritual of tea on the sun porch, Walter shared more about his life, his business philosophy, and, increasingly, about my parents. "Your mother wasn't always like she became," Walter told me one evening. "She was bright, creative. But somewhere along the way, she developed this emptiness nothing could fill, not love, not achievement, certainly not material things. I blame myself for some of that." "How could it be your fault?" I asked. Walter sighed, watching birds at the feeder we had installed outside the window. "I indulged her too much after your grandmother died. Thought I could fill the void with things instead of boundaries. By the time I recognized the pattern, it was too deeply ingrained." Walter revealed how my mother had gone through 3 cars in 2 years during college, each time calling him in tears after accidents. How he had paid off credit card debt multiple times before finally cutting her off financially when she married my father, a decision that created the rift that never healed. "Your father saw her as a connection to money," Walter said bluntly. "And she saw him as someone who would justify her extravagance. A perfect storm of financial irresponsibility." As Walter's condition progressed, he became determined to put his affairs in perfect order. We spent hours in his study reviewing his investments, property deeds, and estate planning. He insisted I understand every aspect of his finances. "Knowledge is security, Samantha," he would say. "Never let anyone manage your money without understanding exactly what they're doing with it." When I was 26, Walter updated his will with his longtime attorney, Jessica Kim. Afterward, he called me into his study. "I'm leaving everything to you," he said directly. "You should know that. And you should know why." "Grandpa, we don't need to talk about this," I protested. "Yes, we do." His voice was firm despite the slight tremor Parkinson's had given it. "You're my child in every way that matters. You've been by my side when your mother chose not to be. You've earned not just my love but my respect, and there's a difference." He explained that his estate valued at approximately $2.7 million between investments, property, and savings would pass to me, with smaller bequests to a few charities we supported together. He had considered leaving something to my mother but ultimately decided against it. "Giving money to someone who can't handle it isn't generosity, it's negligence," he explained. "I've provided for you not because you're my grandchild, but because I trust you to be a good steward of what I've built." It was around this time that the unexpected happened. After 18 years of complete absence, my parents suddenly reappeared. Walter had been hospitalized briefly after a fall, and somehow we never discovered how they learned of it. They arrived at the hospital unannounced, Rachel crying theatrical tears, David speaking loudly about families sticking together. I was getting coffee when they swept past the nurse's station. By the time I returned, they were in Walter's room, and I heard my mother's voice for the first time since childhood. "Daddy, you should have told us you were ill. We've been so worried." Walter's response was measured but cold. "Rachel, this is the first I've heard from you in nearly 2 decades. Your concern seems conveniently timed." They spotted me in the doorway, coffee cups in hand. My mother's eyes widened. Samantha? Oh my God, look at you. She moved as if to embrace me, but I stepped back. Please leave, I said quietly. He needs rest. Now wait just a minute, my father interjected. We have every right to be here. We're family. Family doesn't abandon a 4-year-old and never call, I replied, surprising myself with my steadiness. The nurse can call security if you prefer that exit. Walter pressed the nurse call button himself. When security arrived, my parents left with protests and backward glances, promising to return. Walter watched them go with sad resignation. They found out I'm dying, he said simply. You're not dying, I insisted. Walter gave me a look I'll never forget, gentle but utterly realistic. Everyone's dying, Samantha. Some of us just have a better idea of the timeline. And some people only show interest when they think there's something to gain. My parents called the house repeatedly over the following weeks. I screened the calls, listening to messages that gradually shifted from concern about Walter to questions about his financial affairs. Walter refused to speak with them, and eventually the calls stopped, but the damage was done. I had seen firsthand the people my parents had become, their transparent interest in Walter's money rather than his well-being. Walter's health declined more rapidly after that incident, as if their reappearance had sapped some essential energy from him. He never complained, but I could see his disappointment that his daughter had remained unchanged despite the passing years. Walter died peacefully on a Tuesday morning in October. I had been reading to him Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, one of his favorites. He had smiled at a particular passage, squeezed my hand, and simply stopped breathing. The hospice nurse said it was as gentle a passing as she had ever witnessed. I handled the funeral arrangements according to the detailed instructions Walter had left. He wanted a simple service, no extravagant displays, donations to Parkinson's research in lieu of flowers. The memorial was to be held at the local community center where Walter had volunteered teaching financial literacy to teens. I was greeting Walter's former colleagues when I saw them, my parents, entering the memorial service dressed in expensive, somber attire, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. They had aged, of course. My father's hair had thinned, and my mother had the tight, stretched look of someone who fought aging with cosmetic procedures. Walter's sister Margaret approached me, concern in her eyes. Did you invite them? No, I said quietly. I had no way to contact them even if I'd wanted to. Margaret squeezed my arm supportively. I'll keep an eye on them. You focus on greeting Walter's real friends. Throughout the service, my parents played the role of the grieving daughter and son-in-law perfectly. My mother even delivered impromptu remarks about my beloved father that made me dig my nails into my palms to maintain composure. People who didn't know the history offered them condolences. I maintained my distance, focusing instead on the genuine mourners who had actually been present in Walter's life. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week at Jessica Kim's office. I wasn't surprised when my parents arrived, though Jessica raised an eyebrow at their presence. As I was not informed that Rachel and David Mitchell would be attending, I'll need to verify their identity before proceeding, she said coolly. Once the formalities were addressed, Jessica began reading Walter's will. It was straightforward. Specific bequests to charities, a generous gift to his longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, and the remainder of the estate, the house, investments, and liquid assets totaling approximately $2.7 million to me, Samantha Mitchell. My mother's sharp intake of breath was audible. My father's face flushed dark red. There must be some mistake, my mother interrupted. I'm his only child. Jessica looked at her over her reading glasses. There's no mistake, Mrs. Mitchell. Mr. Harrison was very clear about his wishes. This is completely unacceptable, my father said, standing abruptly. Rachel is his daughter. Blood family comes first in any reasonable estate plan. Jessica remained professional but firm. Mr. Harrison considered his relationship with both of you when making these decisions. The will is legally sound. My parents turned to me, faces transformed by anger. You manipulated him, my mother accused. You turned him against us when he was vulnerable and sick. I met her gaze steadily. I was with him every day for 28 years. Where were you? We had difficulties, yes. But that doesn't change that I'm his daughter, she insisted. Being a daughter is more than DNA, I replied. It's showing up. It's caring. It's putting someone else's needs before your own. Walter taught me that. They left in a fury, my father pointing his finger at me in the hallway outside Jessica's office. This isn't over. You haven't heard the last from us. Jessica pulled me aside after they left. Samantha, I should warn you they may contest the will. On what grounds? Walter was mentally sharp until the very end. They might claim undue influence. Argue that you isolated Walter and manipulated him into changing his will in your favor. Jessica looked concerned. It would be without merit, but that doesn't mean they won't try. And will contests can get ugly very quickly. I left Jessica's office feeling unsettled. That evening, a local newspaper reporter called asking for my comment on the family dispute over Walter Harrison's fortune. Somehow, my parents had already contacted the press, painting themselves as victims and me as an opportunistic caretaker who had taken advantage of an elderly man. The first attack had begun, and I realized with a sinking heart that my parents were willing to destroy Walter's reputation and mine to get what they wanted. Jessica had been right to warn me this was going to get ugly. 3 months after Walter's funeral, a courier delivered legal papers to my door. My parents were contesting the will, claiming Walter had been mentally incompetent due to his Parkinson's disease, and that I had exerted undue influence over him. They demanded the entire estate be invalidated and redistributed according to intestate succession laws, which would give everything to my mother as Walter's only child. The formal complaint contained allegations that made my stomach turn. It claimed I had systematically isolated Walter Harrison from his loving family and manipulated a vulnerable elderly man suffering from dementia. Walter had never had dementia. His mind had remained sharp despite his physical decline. The complaint even suggested I had prevented my parents from contacting Walter during his illness, when in reality they had made no attempt to see him until they learned of his hospitalization. I called Jessica Kim immediately. I just got served with papers. They're actually doing it. Jessica sighed. I was afraid of this. I've looked into their lawyer, Thomas Blackwell. He has a reputation for aggressive tactics in estate litigation. This won't be a genteel dispute, Samantha. What do? We fight. And we need someone as aggressive as Blackwell. I'd recommend Benjamin Hayes. He specializes in will contests and doesn't back down from ugly battles. Benjamin Hayes turned out to be a former prosecutor in his 50s with a methodical approach and a genuine outrage at what my parents were attempting. At our first meeting, he reviewed the complaint carefully. This is a money grab, pure and simple, he said. But they're smart enough to dress it up as concern for Walter's well-being. We need to be prepared for them to use every emotional lever they can find. The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed the depth of my parents' financial troubles. Through mandatory financial disclosures, we learned they were deeply in debt underwater on a mortgage, for a house in Arizona, maxed out credit cards, and multiple high-interest loans. My father's latest business venture, a luxury spa resort, had failed spectacularly, leaving them with judgments from investors. They're desperate, Benjamin observed, which makes them dangerous. People fighting for financial survival will say and do almost anything. Our first court appearance for preliminary motions showed just how low they were willing to go. My mother appeared in court wearing subdued clothes and no makeup, presenting herself as a grieving daughter. She wept on cue when her attorney described how she had been cruelly cut off from her ailing father in his final years. The local media picked up the story, framing it as a family drama over a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Headlines like "Grandfather's Fortune Tears," "Family Apart," and "Daughter Claims Caretaker Niece Stole Inheritance" began appearing. I stopped reading news websites after seeing a particularly biased piece that described me as Walter's controller. More disturbing were the anonymous messages that began arriving emails and social media comments from strangers who had read the sensationalized stories. Gold digger was among the kinder epithets. Some contained vague threats about karma and justice. Benjamin advised me to document everything but otherwise ignore the harassment. This is part of their strategy, he explained. They're trying to wear you down, make you so exhausted and demoralized that you'll settle just to end the nightmare. The stress began affecting me physically. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and found it difficult to concentrate on the consulting business I had built. Some clients, uncomfortable with the publicity, quietly took their business elsewhere. I considered selling Walter's house now, my house, simply to escape the memories now being tarnished by the lawsuit, but Benjamin advised against any major financial decisions during litigation. One night, after a particularly difficult deposition where I had to listen to my father describe me as calculating and cold from childhood, I nearly broke. Sitting alone in Walter's study, the room still arranged as he had left it, I questioned whether the fight was worth it. Maybe I should offer them a settlement, give them enough to make them go away. Preserve what was left of Walter's privacy and dignity. As if he had sensed my moment of weakness, Benjamin called. "Samantha, I know today was rough, but I found something interesting in the documents their lawyer turned over today." "What is it?" "Bank records showing your parents took out a loan 3 weeks before they showed up at Walter's hospital room. The loan officer's notes indicate it was for travel related to family emergency. They knew he was sick before they appeared at the hospital, I realized. They were planning this even then." "Exactly. They've been plotting this for longer than we thought. Don't give up now. Walter trusted you for a reason." That night, looking at Walter's photograph on his desk, I made a new commitment to fight not just for the inheritance, but for the truth about the man who had raised me and the relationship we had built. As the lawsuit dragged into its 4th month, the circle of betrayal widened beyond my parents. Walter's sister, Margaret, who had initially been supportive, called to tell me she was having second thoughts. "Rachel showed me some things," Margaret said hesitantly. Letters Walter had written years ago, saying he wanted to provide for her eventually. "What letters?" I asked, confused. "Walter kept all communication from them. There were no such letters." "Well, she has them," Margaret insisted. "And she's my niece." "Blood matters, Samantha." Maybe Walter wasn't thinking clearly near the end. I was stunned by the sudden reversal. "Margaret, you saw him regularly until his final week. You know his mind was clear. I just think perhaps you had too much influence over him," she said, her voice growing distant. "Rachel says you controlled who saw him, who called." I realized with a sinking feeling that my mother had gotten to Margaret, likely with fabricated evidence and emotional manipulation. A week later, Benjamin informed me that Margaret had agreed to testify for my parents, claiming she had observed me preventing Walter from communicating with family members. More betrayals followed. Walter's former nurse, Diane, who had only attended to him during his final month, suddenly claimed in a sworn statement that I had prevented her from administering medication properly and had coached Walter on what to say to medical providers. The statement contradicted her own clinical notes, but the damage was done another voice supporting my parents' narrative. Most painful was the betrayal by my cousin Jack, Walter's nephew who had spent many summers with us at the estate. Jack and I had been close growing up, but had drifted apart when he moved to California for work. He contacted me asking to meet for coffee, ostensibly to offer support during the lawsuit. Over coffee, Jack seemed genuinely concerned. "This must be so hard on you, Sam, especially after everything you did for Uncle Walter." I let my guard down, confiding my frustration and hurt over the false allegations. Jack listened sympathetically, asked questions about Walter's final months, and offered what seemed like sincere comfort. 3 weeks later, Benjamin called with barely controlled anger in his voice. "Your cousin Jack gave a deposition to Blackwell yesterday. He claims you told him Walter was confused and easily influenced toward the end." "What? I never said that." "We talked about how sharp Walter stayed despite the Parkinson's." "Well, that's not what his sworn statement says. He also claims you told him you were worried about the will being contested because you hadn't done everything by the book." I felt physically ill. Jack had deliberately drawn me out to gather ammunition for my parents. The betrayal was calculated and cruel. Through further discovery, Benjamin uncovered evidence that my parents had been planning their strategy for years. Their computer records, which they were forced to turn over, contained a folder labeled Walter End Plans, dating back 3 years. Inside were notes about Parkinson's disease progression, articles about contesting wills, and even a draft lawsuit nearly identical to the one they eventually filed. More disturbing was the discovery that they had attempted similar schemes before. Benjamin found court records from Nevada showing they had contested the will of my father's uncle after his death, using nearly identical allegations of undue influence by a caretaker. That case had been settled quietly, likely because the elderly neighbor they accused of manipulation hadn't had the resources to fight back. Evidence emerged that my father had two other children from brief relationships, children he had also abandoned financially and emotionally. One had reached out to him as an adult only to be ignored until the person's wealthy maternal grandfather died, at which point my father suddenly showed interest in reconnecting. My mother had her own pattern. We discovered she had been married briefly before my father to a wealthy older man whose family had fought to protect his assets during their divorce. After my father, she had apparently tried to pursue other wealthy men, presenting herself as a devoted daughter caring for an ailing father, a complete fiction given her absence from Walter's life. The private investigator Benjamin hired Sofia Rodriguez documented their current lifestyle despite their claimed financial distress, luxury cars, country club memberships, and expensive jewelry my mother wore when she thought she wasn't being observed. Photos showed a life of extravagance even as they claimed in court filings to be struggling to survive. The betrayals hurt, but they also hardened my resolve. Walter had seen through them long before I had to. His journals, which I found in a locked drawer of his desk, documented his concerns about my parents' character and their potential to cause harm after his death. "I worry they will come after Samantha when I'm gone," one entry read. "Not out of love or concern, but for what they can take from her. I've tried to protect against this, but greed is resourceful." Another entry from years earlier was even more prescient. Rachel called asking for money again today. "When I refused, she threatened to contest my will someday. Said a daughter has rights no matter what. I need to document everything now for Samantha's protection later." Walter had been preparing for this battle long before I knew it was coming. He had anticipated their moves and laid groundwork for my defense. Benjamin was particularly excited about a video statement Walter had recorded with Jessica Kim 2 years before his death. "This is gold," Benjamin said after viewing it. "Walter explicitly addresses his estrangement from your parents, affirms his mental competence, and explains exactly why he's leaving his estate to you. He even addresses potential claims of undue influence directly. Walter's foresight was my strongest weapon. He had known what was coming and had done everything he could to protect me from beyond the grave." As painful as the betrayals were, they only confirmed the wisdom of Walter's decisions. He had recognized the character of these people and had made his choices accordingly. Now it was my turn to fight for his legacy. After months of defending against my parents' allegations, Benjamin decided it was time to change tactics. "We've been playing defense," he said during our strategy meeting. "It's time to go on the offensive." The cornerstone of our counterattack was Walter's letter, a document he had instructed Jessica to give me 6 months after his death or immediately if his will was contested. Jessica had delivered it the day after we were served with the lawsuit. The letter, written in Walter's distinctive hand despite the tremor caused by his Parkinson's, was addressed to me but clearly intended as evidence if needed. It detailed the history of my parents' financial demands over the years, 27 separate requests for money after they had abandoned me, each documented with dates and amounts. Walter had kept copies of every communication, noting that none had ever inquired about my well-being or expressed any desire to reconnect with me. "I have denied these requests consistently," Walter wrote. "Not out of hardness of heart, but because I've learned that funding Rachel and David's lifestyle only enables behavior that ultimately harms them and others. Their abandonment of you, Samantha, was the clearest evidence of their character, but not the only evidence. I make this record so that if they attempt to challenge my decisions after my death, you will have documentation of the pattern that has led to my considered estate planning choices." Walter's meticulous record-keeping extended beyond the letter. He had maintained detailed journals throughout his life, a habit from his business days. The journals, spanning the years after my parents left, contained entries documenting their occasional attempts to contact him, always coinciding with financial difficulties, never with genuine interest in reconciliation or in me. Benjamin saw the potential of these materials immediately. "This isn't just about defending the will anymore," he explained. "We're going to counterclaim for harassment and malicious prosecution. We'll argue they knew their claims were baseless and brought this lawsuit in bad faith specifically to extort money from you." We hired Sofia Rodriguez, a former FBI agent turned private investigator, to dig deeper into my parents' current lives and financial dealings. What she uncovered was even more damning than we had anticipated. My parents had a history of similar lawsuits against wealthy relatives. 3 years before targeting Walter's estate, they had contested the will of my father's elderly aunt, claiming she had promised them her vacation home. The case had been dismissed when the executor produced letters from my father attempting to borrow money from the aunt just weeks before her death. Sophia also discovered my father had 2 other children from subsequent relationships, half-siblings I never knew existed, whom he had also abandoned financially. One of these children had reached out to him as an adult, only to be ignored until the person's maternal grandfather died, leaving a substantial estate. Suddenly, my father had appeared with claims of paternal rights. My mother had her own pattern. After leaving with my father, she had apparently attempted to forge relationships with other wealthy men, presenting herself as a devoted daughter caring for an ailing father, a complete fiction given her absence from Walter's life. Social media posts contradicted sworn testimony they had given about their financial status and lifestyle. On the medical front, Benjamin arranged for Walter's doctors to provide expert testimony about his mental state. Dr. Matthews, Walter's neurologist, prepared a detailed statement confirming that Parkinson's disease had affected Walter's motor functions but not his cognitive abilities. Mr. Harrison remained one of my sharpest patients until the end, he wrote. He consistently demonstrated clear decision-making capacity and was well aware of his financial and personal affairs. Most compelling was the video testimony Walter had recorded with Jessica Kim present. Walter had anticipated a challenge to his will and had prepared accordingly. In the video, dated 18 months before his death, Walter appeared frail physically but mentally alert. He systematically addressed potential claims against his testamentary capacity. I am Walter Harrison. Of sound mind despite what my body is doing, he began with characteristic directness. I am recording this statement to confirm that my decision to leave my estate to my granddaughter, Samantha Mitchell, is made freely, without coercion, and with full understanding of the natural objects of my bounty, which would conventionally include my daughter, Rachel. Walter proceeded to explain his reasoning, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. Rachel and her husband, David, abandoned Samantha when she was 4 years old. They have made no attempt to participate in her life since then, though they have made numerous attempts to access my money. They left her with me without warning and never returned. I have raised Samantha as my own child. She has been by my side through health and illness, success and difficulty. She has earned not just my love but my respect. Walter detailed the history of my parents' abandonment and subsequent financial requests, matching the written documentation in his letter. He concluded by looking directly into the camera. If you are watching this, it means Rachel and David are attempting to challenge my will after my death. Let me be absolutely clear. They are doing so out of greed, not out of love for me or for Samantha. My mind is clear. My decision is firm. And I have arranged my affairs with the full understanding that they might attempt exactly this kind of challenge. Armed with this evidence, Benjamin filed a motion for summary judgment to dismiss my parents' claims and a countersuit for malicious prosecution and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The filings included all of Walter's documentation, medical expert statements, and Sophia's investigative findings. We're not just defending anymore, Benjamin told me. We're showing the court exactly who your parents are and what they're trying to do. Walter gave us everything we need to fight back. He just needed you to be strong enough to use it. The strategy shifted the momentum of the case dramatically. At the next hearing, the judge's questions suggested growing skepticism toward my parents' claims. When my mother attempted to interject with tears during Benjamin's presentation of evidence, the judge cut her off firmly. Mrs. Mitchell, this court is interested in facts, not emotional displays, he said. And the facts presented thus far raise serious questions about the motivations behind your lawsuit. For the first time, I felt we weren't just preventing a theft, we were vindicating Walter and everything he stood for. The courtroom was silent as my mother took the stand, dressed conservatively in a navy suit, with minimal jewelry, a calculated contrast to her usual flashy style. Thomas Blackwell, my parents' attorney, guided her through practiced testimony about her deep bond with Walter and her heartbreak at being systematically excluded from his final years. Rachel, can you tell the court about your relationship with your father? Blackwell asked. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We were very close before Samantha turned him against me. Dad was my rock, my confidant. We spoke almost daily until she began controlling his communication. The fabrications were so bold I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from standing to object. Benjamin squeezed my arm gently, silently urging patience. And when did you notice a change in your relationship? Blackwell continued. After his Parkinson's diagnosis, she claimed. Samantha moved into his house, supposedly to care for him, but really to isolate him. Our calls were screened, our letters intercepted. When we tried to visit, we were turned away. Benjamin's cross-examination was methodical, designed to dismantle her narrative piece by piece. He approached with Walter's journals in hand. Mrs. Mitchell, you testified that you and your father spoke almost daily before his illness. Is that correct? Yes, we were very close, my mother insisted. Benjamin opened the journal to a marked page. I have here your father's phone records from the 5 years before his Parkinson's diagnosis. They show a total of 7 calls from your number during that entire period. Would you like to revise your testimony? My mother's composure flickered. Well, we communicated in other ways, such as letters, emails. We would meet for lunch. Benjamin produced another exhibit. Your father kept meticulous records of all correspondence. In the same 5-year period, he received 2 greeting cards and 3 emails from you all requesting financial assistance. There are no records of in-person meetings. Would you care to revise your testimony again? As Benjamin continued, he systematically contrasted my mother's claims with documented evidence. Her assertion that Walter had promised her his estate contradicted his consistent written statements. Her claim of being barred from visiting him was disproven by hospital visitor logs showing she had never attempted to come until 3 weeks before his death. The most damaging moment came when Benjamin presented evidence that my parents had taken out a loan explicitly for travel related to family emergency 3 weeks before appearing at Walter's hospital room precisely when they had learned of his deteriorating condition through a distant relative. Mrs. Mitchell, would you explain why you needed to borrow money specifically for a family emergency weeks before you claimed to have known about your father's hospitalization? My mother's facade cracked. We had heard he might be ill. We wanted to be prepared. Prepared for what, exactly? Benjamin pressed. To help with his care, she said weakly. Yet according to his doctors and nurses, you never once inquired about his care plan, his medications, or his comfort during your visit. Instead, you asked about his financial affairs. Is that the kind of help you were preparing to offer? My father's testimony fared no better. Under Benjamin's questioning, he admitted they had consulted an estate lawyer about challenging Walter's will even before his death. He became combative when confronted with evidence of previous attempts to contest other relatives' wills, eventually snapping. Everyone leaves something to family. It's normal. The tide turned decisively when Benjamin called our surprise witness. Marianne Thorne, my parents' former housekeeper from the brief period before they abandoned me. Marianne, now in her 70s, had contacted us after seeing a news story about the case. I worked in the Mitchell household from when Samantha was 2 until shortly after she was left with her grandfather, Marianne testified. In the weeks before they abandoned her, I overheard multiple conversations where they discussed getting free of parental responsibilities. Did they express concern for their daughter's welfare? Benjamin asked. Only in terms of ensuring Mr. Harrison would take her, Marianne replied. Mrs. Mitchell specifically said, Dad has plenty of money. He can afford to raise her better than we can anyway. Their concern was making a clean break, not Samantha's well-being. When Thomas Blackwell tried to discredit Marianne by suggesting financial motivation, she calmly produced pay stubs, showing my parents had still owed her 3 weeks' wages when they disappeared money she had never pursued out of concern for me. I didn't want to take from the household when I knew that little girl had already lost so much, she explained. The most dramatic moment came when Benjamin played Walter's video testimony. Watching Walter on screen, frail but mentally sharp, meticulously documenting my parents' history of financial requests and explaining his decision with perfect clarity moved even the court reporter to tears. When the video ended, Benjamin asked the judge to note that it had been recorded in the presence of 2 witnesses, including Walter's neurologist, who had assessed his competence immediately before filming. My mother's composed facade finally shattered during redirect examination. When Blackwell asked about her current financial situation, attempting to downplay the significance of their monetary motivation, she unexpectedly turned to me. "You think you're so perfect, don't you?" she spat, playing the devoted granddaughter. "He was my father. I deserved something from him after everything I went through." "Mrs. Mitchell," the judge warned, "please address your answers to counsel. She manipulated him against me." My mother continued, ignoring the judge. "She turned my own father against me for money." "Your Honor," Benjamin interjected, "may I suggest a brief recess?" But my father stood up from the gallery. "This is ridiculous. We're her parents. We have rights." "Mr. Mitchell, sit down immediately," the judge ordered. Instead, my father pointed at me. "Tell them how you kept us away. Tell them how you poisoned Walter against his own daughter." As court officers moved toward my father, Thomas Blackwell realized he was losing control of his clients and his case. He requested a brief conference with the judge and Benjamin. After 15 tense minutes, they returned. "Your Honor," Blackwell announced, "in light of today's testimony, my clients wish to withdraw their petition contesting the will." The judge looked at my parents, who appeared defeated. "Is this correct, Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell?" My mother nodded sullenly. My father stared at the floor. "Very well," the judge said. "The petition is dismissed with prejudice. Regarding the countersuit for malicious prosecution and legal fees, are the parties prepared to address that today?" Benjamin stood. "Your Honor, we have documented over $145,000 in legal fees defending against this meritless claim. We have evidence the plaintiffs knew their allegations were false when filed, meeting the standard for malicious prosecution. We would ask the court to order full reimbursement of fees and costs." After hearing arguments from both sides, the judge ruled immediately. "Based on the evidence presented, I find the petition to contest the will was filed without probable cause and with improper purpose. The respondent has convincingly demonstrated that the petitioners knew their claims were factually unsupported when filed. Therefore, I order the petitioners to pay all reasonable attorney's fees and costs associated with this action." He turned to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, this court takes a very dim view of using the judicial system to pursue what amounts to a personal vendetta or financial shakedown. You abandoned your child, made no attempt at reconciliation for nearly 3 decades, then expected to profit from your father's estate. The evidence shows clearly that Walter Harrison was of sound mind and had every right to dispose of his property as he saw fit. This matter is closed." As we left the courthouse, I felt not triumph but a profound sadness mixed with relief. Walter had won his final battle through careful preparation and unwavering principles. My parents had shown themselves to be exactly who he always said they were, and I had kept my promise to protect what he had built. 6 months after the lawsuit's conclusion, I stood in Walter's study, now my study, looking at the changes I'd made. His desk remained, but I'd replaced the heavy curtains with lighter ones that let in more sunlight. His collection of business books now shared shelf space with my psychology texts. It was a blend of our sensibilities, a physical representation of the legacy that continued through me. The legal victory had been complete but had left emotional wreckage in its wake. My parents had disappeared again after the final hearing, facing not just the loss of their expected windfall but the public humiliation of having their scheme exposed. Margaret had called once to apologize for her betrayal, explaining that my mother had manipulated her with forged letters and emotional appeals. I had accepted her apology but maintained distance, the trust between us irrevocably damaged. Most surprisingly, a letter had arrived from my mother 3 months after the court case, the first direct communication I had received from her since childhood. It was handwritten on plain stationery, not the expensive monogrammed paper she had used in her correspondence with Walter. "Samantha," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness or understanding. What we did to you was unforgivable, both when you were 4 and recently with the lawsuit. I won't make excuses. I'm writing because I'm in therapy for the first time, trying to understand why I've spent my life chasing material things and discarding what actually matters. I realize now that I never developed the emotional maturity your grandfather had. I ran from responsibility and convinced myself I was entitled to comfort without effort. I don't expect a relationship, but I wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I've caused, and I am genuinely sorry. The letter included her phone number but no pressure to respond. I had placed it in my desk drawer, unsure what to do with this unexpected gesture. Was it genuine remorse or another manipulation? The therapist I had been seeing since Walter's death suggested it might be both genuine remorse expressed by someone still capable of manipulation. People rarely change completely, Dr. Harmon had said, but they can grow more self-aware. The question isn't whether her apology is perfect, but whether engaging with it in any way would be healthy for you. I had decided to send a brief, neutral response acknowledging receipt of her letter but establishing clear boundaries. I explained that while I appreciated her apology, I needed time and space to process our history. I left open the possibility of very limited contact in the future, but made it clear that trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, if at all. What had brought me the most healing wasn't confronting my parents but honoring Walter's legacy in tangible ways. Using part of my inheritance, I had established the Walter Harrison Foundation for Family Stability, which provided support for grandparents raising grandchildren and other non-traditional family arrangements. We offered both financial assistance and emotional support resources, recognizing that family isn't defined by conventional structures but by love and commitment. The foundation had partnered with local community colleges to provide scholarships for caregivers returning to education. We had also established a financial literacy program modeled on the lessons Walter had taught me, helping families develop sustainable economic practices regardless of their income level. Through the foundation, I had met Madison, a 10-year-old being raised by her grandmother after her parents' substance abuse issues had rendered them unable to care for her. Walter would have recognized himself in Madison's grandmother, a retiree suddenly thrust back into parenthood, determined to provide stability despite the unexpected life change. And he would have seen something of me in Madison, a serious, watchful child adapting to a family reconfigured by adult choices. I had become Madison's mentor, meeting weekly to talk about school, friends, and the unique challenges of her family situation. When she confided that classmates sometimes asked uncomfortable questions about her parents, I shared my own experiences navigating similar terrain. We had developed a special handshake that meant families come in all forms, a private affirmation when words weren't enough. My professional life had evolved as well. I had continued my consulting business but had also accepted a part-time teaching position in business ethics at the local university. My course incorporated many of Walter's principles about the responsibilities that come with financial success. Students sometimes recognized me from the news coverage of the lawsuit, but I had found ways to incorporate those experiences into valuable teaching moments about ethics, family dynamics, and the true nature of inheritance. Today marked an important milestone, what would have been Walter's 80th birthday. After finishing my morning calls, I drove to the cemetery where he was buried. The spring air was cool but pleasant, cherry blossoms scattering across the neatly maintained grounds. At his grave, I placed a small arrangement of his favorite flowers, cornflowers, and daisies, nothing ostentatious. I told him about the foundation's latest initiatives, about Madison's improving grades, about the business ethics case study I had developed based on his approach to corporate responsibility. "You are right about so many things, Grandpa," I said, tracing his name on the simple granite marker. About money being a tool, not an end in itself. About family being defined by actions, not just blood. About standing your ground when it matters. The wind rustled through the trees overhead, a sound that had always reminded me of Walter's gentle laughter. In that moment, I felt a sense of completion, not an end to grief, but a transformation of it into something constructive and forward-looking. On the drive home, I thought about the journey from that 4-year-old abandoned child to the woman I had become. Walter had given me more than financial security. He had given me a model of integrity, resilience, and purposeful living that no court case could ever diminish. The true inheritance wasn't the money, but the values that guided how I used it. Back at the house, my house now, in both legal fact and emotional reality, I made a cup of tea and sat on the sun porch where Walter and I had spent so many evenings in conversation. A family photo album lay open on the side table, showing Walter and me at my college graduation, both beaming with pride. The painful chapter of the lawsuit had closed, but the story Walter and I had built together continued. Not as a fairy tale life was too complex for such simplistic narratives, but as something more meaningful, a testament to the family we choose and the legacy we build through daily choices rather than mere DNA. What's your story of chosen family? Have you ever had someone step up for you when blood relatives couldn't or wouldn't? Or perhaps you've been that person for someone else. Drop a comment below, I read every single one. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded that family isn't always about who you're born to, but who stands beside you through life's challenges. Thank you for being here with me today. And remember, the family that matters most is the one that shows up.